Hello, everyone.
Good morning. So there's already a lot of people here. We're gonna start maximum at 9:15. Since this will be a presentation, please, for everyone else, please mute your microphones. I think the host already does that. Um, and I'm not exactly sure if you can hear me well. I hope you do. If you can, give a thumbs up, send an emoji, say hi to everybody via emoji. Guys, this is a very special NSDC where we can't see you, unfortunately, but we hope that it will still bring the same fun, the same energy from your own respective houses. It's really fun to see people from the screen. Hi guys. So we're gonna start at 9:15. Yeah, we're preparing the presentation. Okay, there's quite a lot of people here. So if you have friends, teachers, everyone who would like to see the seminar, please tell them to jump into the meeting. We're still gonna start at 9:15. Yeah. So you can socialize in Discord, and I'll see you. We'll see you later. Hello, everyone. We're going to start in 1 minute. We're going to start the presentation in 1 minute. So again, if you have teammates, friends, observers who would like to see this presentation, please call them out now because we're going to start in just a minute, yeah, guys. Enggak, kita mau intro dulu. Kita halo-halo dulu. Iya, tapi Right. Hello, everyone. So we are now starting the debating seminar. But before that, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Jane. This is Zudi. Say hi, Zudi. So we're part of, with Bobby and Kai, we're part of the education core team of NSDC 2020. Hi, guys. You'll be seeing us a lot through your screens. So make sure that we are familiarized in your screen, in your with you guys, yeah. So before we begin with the material, go to the next slide. Yeah. So before we begin with the material, this is the Menti.com. We will use Menti.com form for you guys to ask questions after the seminar. So if you can just copy the link address or go to Menti.com and copy the code. This is where we're gonna host all your questions after the seminar, and we'll try to answer them as best of our abilities. Yeah, so make sure that you copy the code or copy the link before we proceed with the presentation, because after this you might not see it. So if you guys are done copying the link code, I'm gonna give you some time for everyone. Okay, Andre is also copying the code. We're gonna give the code also to Discord, yeah, after this. So, okay. So without any further ado, Zudi, take it away.
Hello everyone. My name is Zudi, and today I'm gonna be presenting the NSDC 2020 debating seminar with Kak Jane. So I think this is important. I hope that you will have a great day, and you also, I think you need to take notes on the materials that we're going to give to you, because it might help you to better debate in this particular competition. So without further ado, let's just jump to the presentation. Wait. So NSDC 2020 will consist of 5 preliminary rounds, and the top 16 teams after the 5 preliminary rounds will proceed to the knockout rounds, which is the octo final. I think that's quite clear. And also NSDC 2020 will use the WSDC format, because NSDC 2020 is going to be used by the coach of WSDC to filter and select individuals that are going to be able to be fortunate enough to represent Indonesia in WSDC 2021. The WSDC format, what you need to understand and put in your mind is 2 things, which is you need to put emphasis on public speaking, and second, you need to be diplomatic as well. WSDC puts emphasis on public speaking because your audience are not only the debaters that you're going to compete with, your audience are also students, teachers, or even common citizens with no prior knowledge of the magical world of debating. So you shouldn't only emphasize on your content, you should also emphasize on the style and the strategy that you are going to display in your debating performance. Not to mention, you need to also be diplomatic, because as debaters, to represent a country, speakers are demanded to always be diplomatic and politically correct. You need to use vocabulary or diction that try to be as much as possible not offend any single entities, any single individuals that might see your performance. Because you represent a country, you need to be diplomatic. So there are three types of motions in the competition that we're going to compete with tomorrow. First, which is the proposal motion, second, the value judgment motion, and third, the actor analysis motion. For the proposal motion, it means that you need to create a real world policy with this house would. I'm going to explain and elaborate what does it mean for these three type of motion, but I'm just going to flag out and signpost to you about the three types of motion that we're going to debate on. The second type is value judgment. It means it's a philosophical debate with invisible impacts on the real world, unlike the proposal debate. The wording of the motion range between this house believes that, this house prefers a wolf, blah, blah, blah. This house regrets, this house prefers X over Y, or this house believes that X should, blah, blah, blah. And the third type of motion is the actor analysis, which is an observation on which actions or thought process better fulfills the perspective and interest of the relevant actors that are involved in the motion. For example, this house as X would blah, blah, blah. Different types of motions will require debaters to prove different elements for the motion to stand or fall, with different types of setup, different types of argumentation, different types of rebuttal. So let's go deep through that three types of motion. But important disclaimer before I explain these three types of motion. In WSDC style rules, which we are going to put the basis on this NSDC competition, a motion is intended to be defined as generally as possible, unless otherwise stated. What do I mean by this is you shouldn't put specific time and place arrangement to your argument. For example, in the motion of this house who televise criminal trials, you shouldn't only focus on this house who televise criminal trials in country with high criminal rate, because that's not what the WSCC style rules and general debate arrangement expect you to do. You need to talk in a universal context, in a worldwide context, to embrace all and as much as countries, time and place settings that you could debate on. The same thing with this house supports a right to die. You shouldn't only talk about the right to die for specific elderly individuals, because that's not universal enough. Or in the motion of this house would require companies to pay their interns. You shouldn't only put focus on companies that work in the manufacturing industry, because that's not holistic and comprehensive enough, unless the motion stated you to be more exclusive, to be more narrow in defining that particular debate. So the first type of motion is proposal motion. This house would, for example, this house would ban fast food. So the perspective that you need to put on is, as a government, as a parliament of a country, with an effect and an assumption that after you debate on this particular motion, there will be a policy that will be carried out and executed in the lives of people on the ground. So you need to talk in the perspective of government, but government also correlates with how they interact with the society, with the specific individual politicians. This is important for you to also require a setup and mechanism to enforce such proposal. Because in a parliamentary debate, in a parliamentary discussion, you need to be specific on what you want to do, what mechanism that you want to put on to establish such arrangement is really crucial. In the motion of this house would ban fast food, it's not enough for you to only say we're going to ban fast food and then just jump into the argument. You need to give the adjudicators more elaboration on what is considered as fast food that you want to ban. Is it fried chicken? Is it burger? Is it pizza? You also need to put some extent punishment to the corporations, individuals, or business that still transgress this particular policy. So, for example, if McDonald's still wants to sell burger, how do you punish McDonald's for violating this ban that you put as the government of that particular country? Yeah, and who are going to ban this fast food industry is also important. Is it the government? Who is going to enact this? Is it governmental agency that will coordinate with, I don't know, police or a judiciary committee in this particular country to enforce such ban to be comprehensive? So you need to be specific, you need to be elaborative in defining such mechanism. That's the first type of motion, proposal motion. The second type of motion is the value judgment motion. In the wording of this house believe that, this house prefers a world, this house believe that X should blah, blah, blah. I give two examples in this value judgment motion part one. A, this house believe that capitalism is incompatible with feminism, and B, this house believe that feminist movement should oppose capitalism. The question in this debate is the truthfulness of that statement, perspective of a third party or neutral observer. So unlike the policy proposal motion that I mentioned earlier, this debate does not revolve around the interests of the government, but rather as a third party, neutral observer that you want to create a net good to the society, or at least to the actors that you feel the most vulnerable in that particular debate, or at least to the actor that is stated in that particular debate. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you need to focus on feminist movement only, because this debate is not an actor analysis debate I'm going to explain later. This is not an as feminist movement. This house would oppose capitalism. It is this house that feminist movement should oppose capitalism. So you should really clear, and you should also be explicit in telling the adjudicator who you want to protect and why this protection is important, and whether the statement in this particular motion is something that is truthful enough and require the adjudicators to believe that your argument is the one that is most true, but also protect the most vulnerable actor in that particular context. It also means that this value judgment motion, because it's not a policy motion, does not require a model or setup or as government what you want to do, but it tends to require more definition, metrics to more good than harms. For example, you can say that as long as the government side of the house could tell that the capitalism brings more harm than good to the feminism, we can win this debate. You could create a framing in that particular way, or you could elaborate how you should weigh this debate. What is considered as benefit? What is considered as harm to the feminist movement with the idea of capitalism? So it's more on a value judgment, more on a philosophical stance. It does not have real world impact to anyone or any actors that you want to debate on, but it's just a world comparison. If this particular motion is going to be enacted, is it going to be better or not to the actors involved? I think that's clear enough. But the second type of value judgment motion is this house regrets. For example, this house regrets the rise of dating apps. This debate is a retrospective debate with the wording regret on that motion. It revolves around whether or not the world would have been a better place without the existence of what it is we are regretting. So in the motion of this house regrets rise of dating apps, it is as if that you turn back in time, you have this time machine, and the world is as it is right now, but if in the past there would have been not existing on the idea of the dating apps, would the world be a better place as we know right now, or would the world be a worse place as we know right now? So it tends to require a description of a reasonable alternative of world, how the world looks like without the existence of dating apps. You could say that people might meet in a more conventional sense through friends networking, friends connection. People are going to date their coworkers, the friends that are close to them, their neighborhood community members, for example, rather than meeting through the dating apps. Why it's going to create a better world, or why it's going to create a worse world? That's what you need to debate on. So it doesn't necessarily require a policy on like we should ban dating apps. That's not a debate. It's more on the world that is going to look like in both sides of the house. And the last type of motion is the actor motions that often use the wording of this house as X would blah blah blah. So the debate is revolved from the perspective and interest of X, the actor, with the values, knowledge, and considerations of that actor. For example, in the motion, this house as a parent would not send their children to private school. It is quite unstrategic for you to just say that sending children to private school is going to propagate inequality because the kind of privilege that private school entrench with the members of that school more likely to be a privileged individual. So it's going to create such gap between the rich and the poor. Because as a parent, that's not your interest. That's not your perspective. You don't really care about whether the world is going to have more inequality or not. What you really care the most is the prosperity of your child, right? So instead of running that argument, you want to focus on this house would not send their children to private school as the parent, focusing on is the private school have better educational system? Is the private school more expensive and it's going to burden our financial capacity? You need to be more focused on that sense. But it doesn't mean that principles are not relevant. You could say that if the private school are going to entrench inequality, as a parent, you also are an individual that also care about the life of the poor people in this community. So it's going to create such a sense of guilt if you send your child to private school. But you need to frame it, whether this principal argument really plays in this debate, whether as a parent, you really care about the general sense of inequality, which is more on principle sense rather than on a practical consequence on what's going to happen to your child. And this and you need to also be really careful because the argument or the motion about this house belief that acts should is not an actor motion. So if I rephrase this motion and the motion is going to be this house belief that parents should not send their children to private school, it's not on the perspective of the parents. It's more on the perspective of third party neutral observer that believe would the world be a better place if all the parents send their child to private school. So you need to so you can talk more in the general perspective on structural reform, educational institutions, improvement if the parents shall send their child to private school or not. But for the specific motion as an actor analysis motion, you need to be specifically focusing on the perspective and interest of that particular individual. So that's the third type of the motion. For the opposition, approaching a motion one-on-one, the opposition are allowed to prove one or more strategy out of these four below. These are the four things. So, for example, let's refer back on the policy motion that I explained earlier. This house would ban fast food industry because fast food creates a lot of health issues for individuals, for the consumers. You could approach in these four layers. You could pick one, you could pick two, you could pick all of these four as long as it doesn't create tension in your speech. The first approach is that the problem brought by the proposition doesn't exist. So you could say that people currently doesn't have any health issues because of fast food industry. The people that are, for example, obese or they develop cancer or they develop other sense of health issue is not related with the fast food industry per se. Probably it's because of other lifestyle that are not ideal that they subscribe into. So the problem about correlation between fast food and health issue doesn't exist. That's the first approach. The second approach that you could say that the problem exists, but there are alternatives to solve it. You could say that the alternative that the opposition try to prefer is the healthcare service that's going to be improved, that's going to be taking care of the health issues that individuals are going to be affected with by the fast food industry. You could also create more disclaimer on like more socialization by NGOs or governmental agencies on the harms of fast food industry. You could also say that in the fast food packaging, we're going to create disclaimer on what is the possible side effect if you eat these fast food products. So there is alternative to solve it other than banning this fast food industry. That's the second approach. The third approach is you could say that the problem exists, but proposition is only making things worse. You could say that if we ban it, there might be underground fast food industry with uncontrolled caloric composition. You could say people are going to make their own fast food products with no check and balance from the government. It might be create worse health issue for the people on the ground. The That's the third approach. The fourth approach is you could say that the problem exists, but the opposition has a better way to solve it. You could say that we just need to impose a tax for this fast food industry. So we are going to have more capital for the government to invest on the healthcare system that's going to take care of individuals that are affected with this fast food industry. So not only we're going to have more capital, we're also going to be able to take care of people that are affected with these particular issues. So there are the four approaches that you could take as the opposition. So I'm going to give my time to Kak Jane. So.
Right. So since this is a WSDC format, and even though in debating, we do recognize that content and material is more important. So please, what you have just witnessed, that is the core of debating, argumentation, content, and everything else. But in this particular format, the WSDC would recognize three elements, not only for content in its judging. So we would also recognize manner and method, not only matter and content. This is the spectrum of how we're going to evaluate your content for scoring. So we're going to assess a 40% for manner, 40% for content, and 20% for strategy. So next. Okay, so what is manner? In the WSDC format, because you're the expectation of national schools is to find individuals that we're gonna that's going to represent Indonesia in the WSDC debating, the World Schools debating. We do expect individuals to have exceptional manner, not only because, again, you are representing Indonesia as a national team in the WSDC platform. Your judges in the WSDC platform will also not only be debaters, but also teachers who does come from countries where English is their main language, with English being the primary speaking language. So there is an expectation for individuals and for participants to have good English, or at least good mannered style English in NSDC format for the WSDC purpose. Next. Okay, what do we mean by assessing manner? So there's a lot of elements that we're gonna assess in terms of manner. Number one, obviously, is clarity and fluency of speech. Your diction has to be clear. A judge needs to understand what you are saying, and it has to be conveyed in the most effective and clear manner as possible. And secondly, we're also gonna judge grammar and choice of words or diction. So what do we mean by this? We do not mean that you have to have overtly complicated words. We do not mean that you have to master the Oxford English Dictionary, but we do expect a choice of words that is most representative to your argument, most effective in delivering your argument. It has to be grammatically correct. Otherwise, perhaps most English teachers in the WSDC will not understand necessarily what you're saying. Choice of words would also, we do evaluate choice of words that are more sophisticated. So if you have that advantage, that's very good for you. But we do also appreciate simple, effective wordings that can convey your speeches in the most effective way possible, in the clearest way possible. Third is political correctness. What do we mean by this? So understanding that the World Schools format, which the NSDC is looking for talents for, is going to be it's going to include people from multiple countries, multiple backgrounds. We're talking about people from different races, different gender preferences, different religious preferences. We do want individuals to be very aware in what type of words they are saying, what type of implications they are making, especially when directing to specific race, religion, and whatnot. It has to be delivered in a politically correct way. Like you would imagine, parliament members would have to deliver their debates. It has to not offend specific individuals or specific affiliations. That's the way we also expect individuals in NSDC to present their arguments. Fourth is persuasiveness. This can be in many forms. I think what the elements below it explains it. So obviously, because this is a public speaking platform, debating is public speaking, we do want individuals to try in their best way possible to have a speech that is engaging, a speech that is captivating. And you can use a lot of ways. Obviously, you can use your tone of voice, which is pauses and paces, how you're gonna how you're going to emphasize certain sentences that you think is important. Unfortunately, due to the circumstance right now, obviously we cannot see your body language as much. So we're going to probably see this part of your body and then not everything else. But believe me, believe us when we say that your tone of voice, the way that you speak, the way that you emphasize things can also be very, very convincing, even if only through screen. So don't worry, guys, just because we can't see you doesn't mean that you can't try to be convincing. We think that this actually is a time to be more creative or to find different approach in the way you deliver your speech. Obviously, still considering everything else above. So stylistically, don't let your style sacrifice your clarity. Obviously, do not let your just because you want to emphasize certain things to the extent that we cannot hear you. All of these have to be done in balance. I think you guys can find that out. Yeah, and also this is something that it's important for us to disclaim. We will not penalize speaker for having accents. So please do not worry. Just because you have a certain regional accent doesn't mean that we're going to penalize your speech. In vice versa, just because you have a American accent or because you have a British accent doesn't mean that we're going to guarantee you better scores. That's not how it works. We believe in clarity, effectiveness of deliverance, fluency. All of these can be detached from your accent. We believe that everyone can speak good English regardless of what background accent they have. You can speak proper grammar in whatever background English you have. So don't worry, guys. As long as you're speaking clearly, as long as you have very good manner, as long as very good emphasis on your speech, as long as you can grab attention in a good way, yeah? We would not penalize you just because you have an accent. Okay, next. Right. The parameters of what we count as persuasive speech, as I've probably mentioned some before, speaking slow is not only the only one. Speaking the way that you would imagine presidents will speak is not the only one. You are allowed to be emotional if the motion calls it. Obviously, if the motion is about, let's say, about abortion or death penalty, these are very human motions, and we don't expect you to become robots. We believe that everyone has feelings or at least certain inclinations to these motions. It's okay for you to be emotional, not too much. Yeah, we don't want you to start, you don't start screaming on screen. But it's okay for you to be emotional. It's okay to be entertaining. It's all fine to have witty jokes, yeah, guys, not offensive ones. Uh, it's okay for you to have all of these dynamics in your speech. If anything, we think that these are the type of speeches that are very captivating. If you ever seen the previous president of America, Mr. Obama, or his wife speak, they're very quite emotional speakers. They're very engaging. They use a lot of jokes. We think that those are very good samples. Or if you have any other speakers that you think are very engaging, we think that all of these elements can play a good part for your speech. But be careful again, we do not tolerate offensive remarks, even if it's presented as a joke. Even if you call it a joke, even if you call it something that, even if you don't mean it, we do not tolerate offensive statements, racist statements against any type of affiliations, especially in WSTC, guys. So keep that in mind. Next. Okay, so assessing matter, I think Zudi talked about what matter is essentially in the entire presentation. I'm not gonna further address that, but just remember that not only arguments, your rebuttals and your POIs are also counted as your content, your matter. So when you present the POI, when you present the rebuttal, remember that we're evaluating it as a content, yeah? So don't forget that. Just because it's a POI doesn't mean that we don't count it, we don't listen to it. Next. Right. I think this is, again, I'm not going to go too much on this because I think predominantly it's already explained what the engaging content is. But for WSTC format, I think the easiest recognition of what we count as a complete argument is RL. I think everyone would be familiar with this, but if you're not, what we mean by RL is number one, assertion. This is the relevance of the titling of content, or at least the first sentence of content to your explanation. The second is reasoning, obviously, the elaboration of the particular argument, the context in which what you're speaking, how you're going to prove your logical conclusion, for example. Third is, also in terms of reasoning, we also do appreciate examples. Okay, it's missing in the presentation. E is for examples here, guys. The supporting facts for the points, statistics, case studies, and whatnot. One thing to remember is to avoid, I think Zudi already also mentioned this, home turf or self-referential example. So don't use your own context or your made up context because you are speaking against other teams. Later on, if you go to a WSDC against other countries which will have a different context, I think again, Zudi already addressed this. Please make your examples as generically known as possible. Again, you might differ if the case, obviously every motion differs, but generally this is the accepted form of example is something that is universally known. And lastly, of course, is link back. How does all of your explanation prove your first initial assertions? Just to wrap up your argument cleanly, so we know that this is a whole package that you're delivering to us. Yeah. Next. Too much. Okay. Lastly, is strategy or method. It's the art of presenting a case both individually or as a team. Obviously, this includes your issues, your model, and your stance. First speaker is expected to present stances. You're expected to present a model if it is a motion that requires if it is a proposal motion. And then you have two distinct arguments between speaker. This is signposting. So what is your first argument? What is your second argument? How is these arguments important, for example? It has to be clearly pointed out in your speech in WSDC or NSDC format. Individual strategies can also include time management. Obviously, if you have two arguments, how are you going to divide the times between the two? Or if you have rebuttals to bring, how are you going to divide the times there? And then role fulfillment. Like again, first speaker is expected to carry a model or a stance. Whip speakers are expected to carry rebuttals for all previous speakers. Next. Okay, so example of a strategy. Say if you're a first speaker and you said, I'm going to bring two arguments. Obviously, we expect to hear both those arguments. Just because you signposted in the beginning, if you don't say it in the end, we're not going to write anything. So we do expect not the exact same amount of time. It's not, you don't have to count it by second, but we do expect, if you think that those two arguments are as important as each other, we do expect a fair amount of time, a fair distribution of time given to those arguments. So for example, don't bring your second argument in the 7th minute of your speech, because obviously you're not going to have the time to explain that argument. So be very mindful in how you're going to allocate your time to present arguments. So if your first speaker says we're going to bring three arguments, first speaker's going to bring two, second speaker's going to bring one, let's say, we expect to hear those arguments to have it to exist. This could be a strategy also. If you have, let's say, three arguments, how you're going to divide it between speakers, that's entirely on your discretion, how you're going to divide it on your team. But again, be mindful on the time allocation of each argument. Next. Okay, let's hurry up before so we can have questions there. Okay, point of information. This is very important in WSDC format. Different than any Asian or BP format, teams can get credit, extra credit, or penalized for the lack of POI. So each team in this format should offer at least 2 POIs during your opposition speech. And when you're speaking, you should receive at least 2. One would be the bare minimum, or at least the minimum. If there are offers of POI to you, it's better for you to just at least receive one, even if you have a lot of content. Because in WSDC, we value engagement a lot, and teams and speakers could be penalized for shutting down a lot of POIs. Teams could be penalized for not offering any POIs. And also remember that you're gonna evaluate the content of those POIs. You're gonna note it down. You're also gonna evaluate how speakers answer to those POIs as a part of your matter. Yeah. So POIs are very important. Please make sure that you engage with speakers. Next. All right, penalty. Now, this is something that exists quite specifically in the NSDC/WSDC formats. So teams could get minus scores for these couple of reasons. Offensive remarks, like I've said in the beginning. Offensive hand gestures, I think you know what I mean. Disturbing behavior, since we are seeing you through camera, please be mindful of what's going on behind you, what you're doing when you're still recording, just because you're at home. Be very mindful with the way that you oppose yourself. Cheating, obviously, we understand that there will be limitations. Obviously, we cannot go to your homes and check your phones, and we're not going to do that. But we please value your own integrity, value other people's effort. Don't cheat. Don't Google when you're speaking. Don't find other people's arguments on internet for your case building. If we notice odd speeches that sounds familiar or sounds like something that came out of Wikipedia, we will flag that as cheating. Again, we're not going to be able to check you one by one. So we do expect every single one of you to please have your integrity and not cheat during this tournament. You can also get penalized for not giving or receiving at 2 POIs, one at least, yeah, 2 POIs. We're gonna see how much you're gonna allocate your strategy time on your speech. Let's say if you're under time and you only accept 1 POI, we can punish you. But if you have a good amount of content and you accept only 1 POI, we're gonna evaluate that also. So this is not rigid, but we are gonna see how you plan out your speech. Obviously, overtime and severe overtime and undertime is also subject to penalty. Next. Okay, so that is it for the presentation. Again, to remind everyone, we have a menti.com open for questions. So that's what we're gonna do now. I'm gonna check the Menti page. Okay, we have some questions right now up on the screen. Should I share the screen? Yeah. Apa kita sharein aja ya? Let me stop sharing this. Okay, so first question on far left. This is like my presentation already said. Is there a penalty rule for point of information? Yes, there is in WSTC format as well as NSDC. Again, this is not rigid. There are discretions. For example, like I've mentioned before, if your speech is under time and you don't take any POI, obviously that's a fault strategy and you have time to answer POIs, that is subject for penalty. If we see a team not offering any POI at all, that is also subject for penalty. If, however, we see a speaker with very good arguments, very good time allocation, but there's a lot of things that they need to say and they can only take 1 POI, obviously we can waive that and say they still have very good strategy, the content is still very good, we think that it's okay, they only take 1 POI. So it is up to discretion, but the general rule of thumb is that everyone should accept a POI and everyone should offer a POI. Can you give an example of a witty joke? It can be anything, guys. I'm not a good joker. I don't know if Zudi has a good joke. You can jump in. But apa ya? You guys are smarter lah in making jokes.
You can state a statement that is rhyming. For example, there are 3 reasons why the one that's going to fall in this debate is not the motion, but it's the opposition. I think it sounds funny for some people. Or anything like...
Okay. You guys are smart lah.
Yeah,
making
you're
jokes.
smart.
You guys are better than us lah making jokes. I'm too old to be guys. Okay, you guys are okay.
But
there's a lot.
remember, don't be offensive.
Yeah, that is what you need to remember. All right, how do you recommend provide evidence or data statistics when you're not allowed to do any research? So, obviously, you have time to prepare prior to this. We do allow printed materials in the normal NSDC condition. So if you do have previous printed materials, you are allowed to do that. Obviously, there are data that I think everyone should have just known. For example, the general number of COVID cases in Indonesia. I think that is something that you guys are encouraged to read. I'm pretty sure that everyone knows this data. So what is important for this, for particular data and statistic? Yeah, it should not be an argument. Data and statistics are not arguments. You would have to still have logical conclusions. You will still have argumentation. Data and statistics are only there to prove a point. So it is to back up a case. Does it have to be in your argument? No, it does not. But if you happen to know something that can back up your case, that will be very good. So please don't research just because you felt like it's going to make your argument better. It's not. Good arguments are good arguments, whether or not you use data or not. Yeah, guys, yeah. I think Zudi has made it very clear. Argumentations, logical conclusion, and whatnot. These are the things that we're looking for when we talk about content. So don't pressure yourself. If you don't know any data, you don't have to find one to make a good argument. That's what we're saying. So, guys. So if you happen to know one, that's good. If you don't happen to know, that's okay. You can still make good arguments. Okay, there's a lot of questions.
Next, how much is the time limit for POI? 15 seconds. And you can only raise another POI after being rejected 15 seconds after the first POI was rejected.
Don't harass. Don't harass.
Case building time for NSDC is 1 hour or 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes. R2 POI is considered as a total for a team or for each speaker. So each speaker needs to accept 2 POIs, but as Kajen told you that if you have a strategy, you can only accept 1 POI. But for each team, when one speaker of your opponent gives their speech, it's expected for a team to give 2 POI total. So it's not per individual, it's per team for each speaker of your opponent speech.
So there's a lot of questions about POI. Yeah? I think we've already made it clear as to how many POIs you can take because it is up to discretion. There are penalty points. The amount of penalty points is discretion of the adjudicator, but you can get up to -1 per each speaker. 2 POIs are for tadi udah dijelas. I think we already explained for POI, but the opponent isn't prepared to take POI. I think at this question. So again, adjudicators will not see this as in a robotic way. We're not going to just penalize you by numbers. We are going to see the dynamics of the debate. We're also going to observe the dynamics of the speeches. But the general rule of thumb is that everyone should accept POI. Yeah, guys, begitu guys.
And if you give bad POI, you could be penalized -1.
Yeah.
If you give good response to POI, you can get +1.
You can get plus, yeah.
Get the bonus score.
You can get a
But
bonus.
But it's up to the judge discretion. So do your best. That's the point.
These are all POI questions. Oh, okay. If the opponent is really questionable, is it offensive if we say that argument is confusing in our speech? So this is a form of manner, yeah, guys. We do expect for you to be respectable to one another. Don't say rude remarks. But obviously, to say that your opponent's argument is confusing is not rude if you deliver it in a way that is proper. Obviously, you cannot mock them. Obviously, you cannot make hand gestures that are offensive. Don't stick up your tongue, for example. So there are ways for you to deliver these type of questioning strategies that are proper, and we do accept that, as long as you're not mocking, as long as you're not deliberately intimidating your opponents in a way that is personal, no, like physical, for example. For example, a good example would be, we don't understand our opposition because they speak in a certain accent. That's obviously offensive, right? Because we are not going to mock people just because they have certain accent. So don't do that. But if you say that, unfortunately, we don't understand our opposition because they only spent, let's say, 5 seconds in this argument and we don't get any conclusion. Obviously, that's not offensive. So I think, again, you guys are smart enough to to determine what counts as an offense, what counts as a proper rebuttal, or at least a remark to your opposition. Yeah, guys?
And just like Jen, just to in a side of caution, it's much preferable for you to say the argument is contradictive because it's less offensive. You point out the substantive policy on their case. If they told you about X, they couldn't run the argument about Y. If they told you about Y, they couldn't run the argument of X because it's inherently a tension. So not only it makes you less inclined to the side of disrespectability and offensiveness, but it also makes your argument becomes much more substantive because you don't point out only what is missing on them, but you point out what is their policy is in a substantive, logical, elaborative way.
Okay, so we're not gonna take any more POI questions. I think that should be very clear. Any other question? Just curhat. This is very cute. So for word vomits or for reflexes when you repeat certain sentences, because we're taking this seriously. Obviously, if you stutter too much in your speech, that's gonna lessen your manner because obviously having too much stutter is not convincing. So how do you curb that? Number one would be speaking slower, more careful. If you can write more things, you have more notes, and you can read off that to curb your stutter. That's also a strategy. So you number two also is also to have yourself calm down before speaking, because if you're nervous, you're gonna stutter more. So make sure that you are chill and you're good. But if you do stutter again, just because you have a glitch in your speech doesn't mean you're gonna automatically minus your score. Obviously, we're gonna value your manner as a whole, not only in the first minute or the last minute. So it's okay if you feel like you're not going to be speaking that fluent. Um, Q&A. Yeah. We understand everyone is human here. We are not primary English speakers, nor I, nor Zudi here. So it's fine. But please make sure that you're still delivering speech in a way that it's convincing, in a way that is engaging. Yeah. Okay.
If opponent say something funny and we laugh on camera, is it gonna be penalized?
No, no lah.
No, but
It's funny, but don't mock, yeah. No, this is not laughing, mocking, yeah. If you think that comment is funny and you're not laughing, that's really sad. So it's okay to laugh. But again, no, this is please don't do it in a manner that is mocking. If you think something's funny, then laugh, but not in a way that just look at it. It's not that way, guys. So, appreciate each other's jokes, even if they're not that good. Yeah, sometimes, even if they're not. Okay, what else? What else?
last question. If we use an emotional approach, will it make my speech become less diplomatic? So as Kak Jen told you, it's gonna be contextual. If the emotion is about abortion, death penalty, human lives, human rights, you need to be more emotional because you need to show that you have feelings to the adjudicators. You need to show that you're not a robot. But if the motion is about IR, economic, financial motion, or international politics that talk about the relations between US and Russia, and you're crying because of the international relation is bad, it's weird, it's bizarre. So you need to be contextual and you need to make your own call. What should you use? Be more diplomatic or be more emotional? And it's not mutually exclusive as well. You can be diplomatic and emotional in the same time if you frame it well. That's all.
Yeah, I think. Oh, their last is cap 820. Yes, after add to 820, that will be count as an overtime. And lastly, on that regard of so we're gonna close up here, guys. So lastly, on the regard of the emotional speech, I think a good guideline to remember is that think as if you're speaking in a form in the front of Parliament or in front of DPR. I think contextually in Indonesia. So obviously, all of the emotions, all of the deliveries have to be delivered in a way that is accepted in Parliament settings, in public Parliament settings, guys. So think about that, use that as a guideline, and then I think everyone should be fine. So this is the end of our session because we have a tech meeting after this. Thank you so much, everyone. If you still have pressing questions, obviously, we have a Discord channel that you can have it open there because we're going to close the Menti after this, yeah. And all of the tech questions you should ask after this because we do have a tech seminar. So again, from me and Zudi, thank you so much, everyone, for attending the seminar. We would love to see you everyone again tomorrow, or at least later, yeah, for round zero. Good luck.